Hello, everyone. Suzanne here from the Project Manager Clinic, and I'm here again with Margaret DeSantis. And it seems that everybody wants to know about the day in the life of a project manager. So we're here today to talk to you about a day in the life of a project manager. And what we were just talking about is it's not really what you probably think. It's not as static as you think. It's a bit dynamic, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, Margaret, how have you been?
I've been well, thank you, Suzanne. It's been a bit cold here in Sydney, but looking forward to the weather warming up. It's very close to the winter solstice, so I know that the days will start getting longer and we can start enjoying the warmer weather in spring. So looking forward to that.
Looking forward to it. Now, Margaret, you've been in project management land for quite some time. So you've got a lot of experience under your belt, and just reminding people that Margaret does not work for the Project Manager Clinic, but she kindly gives her time and expertise to talk through these webinars. Again, don't forget to subscribe down below and give us a thumbs up if you're happy with what you're hearing. A recording will be made of this, so you'll see that on the YouTube channel. Um, so, Margaret, day in the life, is it as simple as a day in the life or not?
So a day in the life of a project manager will depend on what phase of the program or project you are in. And I find that at the beginning of the project or the program, and also at the end, there seems to be a bit of flurry of activity. And it depends on, the organization, and it depends on, whether the organization wants you to just focus on delivery or whether they want you to focus on actually starting up the project and a business case or doing a feasibility. So if you've been asked to do a feasibility or a business case where you are actually looking at the different options available if you want to, say, do a procurement of a particular software, then you would potentially put down all the options available and the recommended option and get the business case approved. Now, a lot of project managers are asked to write the business case because sometimes they are hired to actually commence the business case and then work from there. Now, the business case is basically the start of a project or program, and within the business case, it contains the scope, the budget, the resources. The resources, basically their title or what they're going to be doing in the project. And it has risks, issues, although at a business case, there are usually no issues. The issues actually commence once the project has basically been approved. And from
Now
there,
that's you just sort of that was a very throwaway there that you just said, Margaret. The issues virtually commence once the project's approved. Yes, that's for sure.
that's right. That's right. And and then in the business case, you have dependencies and you have assumptions. So the dependencies may be that, for example, if you are going ahead and putting through a project, you may require another project to be completed before your project starts. And so there is a dependency on that for you to commence or for you to have some of the work completed beforehand. Now, once that business case is approved, then you may actually start potentially a procurement process if you are actually procuring software
So
or a
we're
vendor.
quite a bit into the project now, aren't we, Margaret? Because this is not what we're doing in a day, are we? We're
That's right.
doing a lot of this sort of activity is happening, as you said, across the different phases of the project. So a typical day for a project manager is probably a fair bit of communication and also, from my experience, quite a bit of documentation. And you've talked about the business case and then procurement, which is a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
That's right. And you would probably engage legal. And if you have a procurement team, I've worked in organisations where there is no procurement team.
Yeah,
And so you would basically have a managed services agreement basically drawn up to engage a vendor and potentially statements of work. And if you are in the position where you don't have the skill set within the organisation, then you would, for example, actually use services from, say, another organisation to
yeah.
provide you with the actual resources to help you with the project.
And look,
And
just
then,
just on that, Margaret, a day in
mm,
the life is not just us going into the office and opening up our laptop and everything's rosy. What you were just talking about then, we may have to engage with financial people, professionals in their own right, legal people, which is what you just mentioned, and legal people external to the organisation. So that's a different skill set that we're dealing with in and of ourselves, isn't it? And we're not just project managing a team at this point.
that's right. So we're actually trying to basically get the ball rolling, and the day to day during the initial part of the project or program will be different because
Yeah.
you're actually starting something up and you're trying to get the ball rolling as a result of the approval of a business case. And so that's why at the start, every day will be different. You'll be, for example, once the agreements are done, you'll also be looking for resources within the organization, or you may be in a position where you have to hire and therefore conducting interviews through the
Yes.
day. So,
Uh, Then that's another thing, isn't it? Because
mm,
I don't know that people always think about a project manager doing this. And I know we talked about this in another session, but that recruitment stuff, when you're involved, you might not be actually putting the ads out and doing all of those things, but that's quite time consuming, isn't it, as a project
it
manager?
is. It is.
Mm,
And I mean, I've been in a situation where a lot of my day throughout the week and for maybe 2 to 3 weeks is
yeah,
consumed by interviews because you're not only just interviewing one person, you're interviewing probably four or five, and then
yeah.
you're doing two or three per person. So that
And you might have a
therefore,
panel of other
that's
people
right.
that you've got to organise as well. If you're fortunate, you've got a project coordinator or someone that's helping you do that. But when you're first starting, you may not even have that benefit of anyone helping
That's
you
right.
to organise. And it's a lot, isn't it?
That's right. It's a lot. And then you're trying to set up your risk register, your RAID log, your risk assumptions, issues, dependencies, and
Yeah.
decision logs, and you're basically setting up your budget and you're tracking actuals against your budget. So you're having all of these documents or if you have an application that actually tracks all of this,
Yeah.
you're basically, having that set up. And so you're doing that as well as hiring so that you can have the resources available to basically start.
When we're talking about resources, it depends on the project. They're not always just people.
That's right. And you're quite right, especially if you're co-locating a team
Yeah.
within a particular building, for example, and you're setting that up, then you do have to set up workspaces or have workspaces available. I remember in a particular project where we had to do 3 months of testing. I organized 3 months of, they call it a war room, where you
Yeah.
just basically block out that whole room for 3 months and all the testers go into this war room. I had computers set up, all the cables and everything set up, ready for them to basically test, communicate with each other, and work together to enable, work to be fairly distributed, testing to be done, anything that happened during that the war room, any issues to be sorted out between them and things like that. And so you're right, that particular time I had to organise for, physical
Yeah.
hardware, physical rooms, etc.,
Cabling,
for
cabling,
cabling,
and even the
cabling.
even the masking tape or whatever they call that's not masking, even the tape, the black tape to go across the cables when they ran across the floor. When people run out of stuff, they don't they don't look anywhere else much except the project manager. So the
That's
day in the
right.
life, which is what we were saying before, it's dynamic and it really does depend on where you are in the project. I actually
It
love
does.
those ones where you're just setting up. Actually, it's really fun, hard but
Yes.
fun.
Yeah, yeah. So you're right. And so depending on where you're at on the project,
Yeah,
once you have your project set up, your risks set up, your issues set up, your budget set up, your resources set up, then you can concentrate on delivery. And once you do delivery, depending on the size of the project, if it goes across multiple business units, cuts
yeah,
across, so you would probably set up a regular working group and basically meet every week at least to discuss what things had been done, what things are yet to do in the next coming week. And this is all looking at your project plan activities and what's coming up. So that's what I would be doing. I'd be, setting up this project plan, organizing working groups, doing status reports on a weekly basis,
yeah,
and and then at least having a steering committee once a month. And of course, setting up the steering committee pack where you're basically talking about the status of the work, what's yet to be done. Are we on track? Are we green? Are we red? Are we amber? Basically the status of the budget, what are we looking at, and basically what risks, especially if you've got a whole risk log, I would be concentrating on the top 3 to 4 risks
yeah,
that are very high, and you'd be reporting those to the steering committee. The steering committee would be set up based on the sponsor, the project owners, and the project manager, and basically that's the group. And if
yeah,
you'd also set up the RACI as well so that you can organize communication between all the various teams. Now, if the project is small enough that it involves one business unit, it's a particular product that's being launched, and it's just say it's a bank and the product is a credit card. Okay, that's a particular group of a team that's launching a particular product. You could easily have a small team like a Scrum team, and the project manager wouldn't necessarily pop in every day, but they might pop in 2 to 3 times a week and see how the Scrum team's going. And the Scrum team might be a business analyst and potential developers, or you know the software vendor if there's a vendor that's developing.
yeah. Which is
So
the
uh,
agile part of the project.
the agile,
Yeah, yeah,
and you would basically not necessarily be every day, but the team would manage themselves. They would have a daily stand up. They would, and then you would also assist in potentially providing the the plan for the actual 2 to 3 months plan in terms of what's being done in the next 2 to 3 months in terms of priority of activities that are being done, and you would help basically facilitate the team in terms of providing the list of items that are more urgent and that have to be done now and in that order. So you'd be helping with planning and helping
yeah.
with
Or even
your
driving.
roadmap.
driving the planning. So
driving the
the
planning.
project manager is not necessarily pulling, they're pulling the levers, but they're pulling the levers from often a bird's eye view of things. And you talked a bit about that with agile team and a scrum. So you may not be working directly in that agile team. There's probably a product manager or owner or somebody else or a team leader in that's running that. But the project manager is overseeing. So popping in and out, as you said, making sure that component of the project or program is actually working. Um, if it's a big program, though, for me, I tend to spend my time after the first bit when it's really busy and I'm getting all the documentation sorted out. I spend a lot of my time having coffee and talking to people, which is a really nice place to be. But that assumes that you have put the work in prior, which is all of that work that you're talking about or you've been talking about, all of that documentation, establishing those links with other people and maybe other organisations. So my day generally is spent talking to project managers, um, working out what they're doing, where they're at, mitigating any risks or issues that they've got on their project because it's in my program, escalating things that they have escalated up to me. So there's often a lot of talking. I try not to have too many meetings, but there's a lot of talking. There's a lot of emails.
That's right. And totally agree. And in a way, it's doing coaching with your,
Yes.
project managers. And you're also talking to potentially the sponsor.
Yeah.
If you've got a very close association with a sponsor, or you've got a close association with a business owner that will basically benefit from the delivery of the project, and you're finding out, you're giving them feedback, and you're also receiving feedback. You're saying potentially if there's anything that's delayed, you might say these things are delayed. However, I know that you want us to start something else next week. What
Yeah.
do you want us to do? So you're actually basically always trying to make sure that what is important, front of mind, is being delivered first,
And a
and
flow,
not
and a flow is happening. So
a
things
flow is
continue
happening.
to move. Um, And you said about coaching, and we quite often, as project managers, have to coach the project sponsor because a lot of them are bought in and they've never been a sponsor before. And they've got very good intentions, but they've not got that experience. And I find, particularly on programs, where there might be a key sponsor or my main sponsor, but then the other projects have got sponsors or key stakeholders. There's a lot of, I find, coaching or information that needs to flow even between those people and the project managers. So we've sort of moved away from all of that foundation work of the documentation. So we're saying we're now in delivery or we've just gone past discovery or whichever way phase you want to work it. But we're now in implementation. When we talked before, Margaret, before we started, we we might cruise a little bit for a little while, but then we get really busy again. So the day in the life of a project manager gets really busy again. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And, I find that keeping on top of the risks, keeping on top of the issues is really important at this point, because more issues start to arise as the project starts to be basically increased in timeline. And
Yeah,
also potentially risks might crystallize. So then you've got to actually ensure that the mitigations are implemented or closed out, or the risk is closed out, and if it does turn into an issue, that it's addressed straight away. And that's like all hands on deck.
yeah,
You've got to actually ensure that that's addressed. And I find that typically in a lot of the projects that I've managed over the years, a lot of the issues stem around resourcing. And it might be that the
Okay.
resourcing, basically they're strapped for time because they are working on multiple projects, and you might only be
Yeah.
they may only be assigned, say, 10% or 20% onto your project, but they've got competing priorities. So what's important from a organizational point of view is that the priorities are very clear, that resources understand where the project sits in the priority queue, and if there is competing priorities, that the project manager may have to negotiate with other project managers. For
Yeah.
example, if they both want the same resource to get work done on their project, and
I
it's
call this
critical for both.
brokering. I call this brokering.
Yes,
So
that's right.
it's often we're brokering the resource with their own manager. Quite often, if they're a permanent FTE, if they've been hired specifically for your project, that's another story. You generally have more autonomy with them, but I've often found that I'm standing there almost guarding them to make sure that nobody else says, "Gee, that person's really fantastic. Do you think we could just have them work across here on our No, you can't. So you're always looking at negotiating, communicating where you are with the resources, but most importantly, brokering. So when we're again talking about the day in the life of a project manager, I think that people would assume that we go in almost with a clipboard and we check this off, check that off, check this, and we're doing status reports and schedules all the time. But the reality, I think, is far more um, intricate than that. We are really negotiating, facilitating, coaching was the other thing that you said, communicating and brokering. And
And
sometimes
protecting your,
and
yeah,
protecting,
sure.
and sometimes it's negating conflict, and some of the negotiations can be quite heated. I don't know if you've had that sort of example, but I've managed some very big projects with some very large vendors, and sometimes it's a tier one and a tier two, and they're used to getting their own way. So the negotiating table can be quite heated, and that tends to happen at the start of the project, but strangely enough, creeps back in again at certain points through the project where they're not delivering or something's happened or you've got to renegotiate the scope. So we're sort of almost putting on the hat of a legal person in some ways to understand the contract, even if there are legal people in the organisation. But as you mentioned, sometimes we're dealing with an external organisation. And
That's
that's a
right.
different culture sometimes, isn't it?
That's right. And I find that if you have a really good rapport with
Yeah,
your vendor, and especially if you have a one-on-one catch up with your vendor every week, for example,
yeah,
you're much more closely aligned. You have a good working relationship with your vendor, and they're more likely to be upfront and honest
yeah,
about whether they've got issues with their resourcing and they're going to be delayed, and trying to negotiate upfront before it actually happens. I've had the situation where, for example, I engaged a vendor. They were based in Singapore. It was Chinese New Year, and
right,
basically the entire office was going to be away for the whole week, and they had to
right,
deliver certain work within that week, or close out the delivery. So I had a good working relationship with the vendor, and the vendor had, telephoned me and asked me whether it was okay for the delay to be 2 to 3 days from the contract. And
right,
because I had already included a buffer into the plan. Of
Yes,
course, you
yes,
always include contingency.
yes, absolutely. Hmm.
Then I had said that is perfectly fine if you can deliver that 2 to 3 days later. I understand that your office has a week where, they're, celebrating Chinese New Year, and we were still able to build in the work that we had to do by the due date once we had the delivery of what the vendor was going to deliver to us. In that we had to ensure that we were going to have it tested.
Mm,
So that's an example of where you have a good working relationship with the vendor
yeah,
and you're able to include the delay in your timeline because you've already included a buffer in your timeline. And so it all worked out perfectly.
it's a
So
bit
having
of
that,
there's a bit of discernment, isn't there, too? Um, I won't say what I used to call it, but it's like I used to have a meter, I'd say, in my head, and it was a meter that um, I could work out what sort of rubbish they were telling me and if it was true or not. And it was like, I don't think that's right what you're just telling me now. And it's like, as project managers, we need to understand our project inside and out, back to front. That's what will get us, I think, the best solution. And to um, be discerning about what people are telling you, if they're delivering, if they're not delivering, um, what the context is that they're talking about. And like you've mentioned, Singapore, we quite often, as project managers, we're not even going into an office, we're getting on a plane. Then we're getting into a car, then we're going from this site to that site to another office. So the project manager's life can actually be one that's, well, in my case, spent jetting about the place, going to numerous sites. So I think people maybe don't think about this either in project management land when they think I'm going to be a project manager, because it depends on your project, and you can be sent to the ends of the earth for
that's
your
right.
project.
You're right. You're right about that. And, when I was working for a not-for-profit, I
Yeah,
was actually flying to the US, and all of the different resources that were required to set up the project and start the planning process would all meet in one location, and it was usually in head office, and it
yeah,
was in the US.
yeah,
And we would plan out the entire project from those few days that we were there, co-located,
yeah,
and all heads together and organizing how we would go about organizing this project across the world and using
in different
resources
time
across the world
zones, in
in different
different
time
time zones.
zones,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
how we would organize it. And so the
yeah,
planning process we usually was in a different location, not the one where I was actually at.
yeah, yeah,
So you're
yeah,
right about that.
exactly. Yep. And this bring into focus your management ability, because even though you might be on a plane and you might be on a plane for 16 hours or something, if
Mm,
you're going to the US, you still have a project team to be managing in most cases, and sometimes they still can be quite a large team. So a day in the life of a project manager is not just, like I just said, not going just into the office, being on a plane, doing all of those things, getting those documentation and other things happening, but still you have a team to manage. So that's not always easy, is it? Is it, Margaret? When you're jet lagged and a bit blurry.
that's right. And so for the week, usually the planning week where I was, going to the US, for
Yeah,
that week, at that point, we hadn't actually had the resources set up. So it was working out which resources we needed, where they were going to come from, were they going to be internal, whether they're going to be hired as contractors, and basically how it was going to run. So
yeah,
at the time, I was in the IT team, and then you had the change manager and the
yes,
change team from the business perspective. And so we had to make sure that we were both aligned and that everything was coordinated so that it was a smooth delivery and it wasn't just, you know, it wasn't just, making sure that the technology, for example, was put in and not used, that
Yeah.
the actual users were going to be able to use the technology. So so the change manager was brought
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
to make sure that, the training was going to be done. There was training manuals, there was sessions, and so on. I was working on ensuring that the technology was working with the vendor, making sure that the technology was put in, making sure that the technology was going to be tested properly, integrated, because there was 3 technologies that we were using, and
Mm.
so making sure that it all worked together.
So
So
you get
yeah,
busy again, don't you? Yeah.
that's right. So it really
Mm.
depends on where you are. But
Yeah.
just going back to what I was saying about having that close connection with the vendor, you
Yeah.
also really need to have that close connection with the sponsor. And
Of
I
course.
call it, when the sponsor doesn't know what's happening, I call it an absentee landlord, because it is very similar to an absentee landlord,
Yeah.
where they're not knowing or not participating, not not understanding where it's at. So having that close rapport, making sure you catch up with a sponsor, potentially on a weekly basis,
Yeah.
and because also at the point of a steering committee meeting where you're providing a status, the sponsor should have no surprises. They should be
Yes,
aware
exactly.
of exactly what is going on.
Yeah.
And so the project manager is a integrator, communicator, issue resolver, mentor, coach, and
Yeah.
you know,
It's
uh,
broad.
very broad, ensuring
Yeah.
that if there's any
Yeah.
issues, that there are no blockers, that the project is able to basically proceed smoothly and it's not stopped.
My family always used to say to me, "What do you do? What do you do?" Like they couldn't understand what I did. And the example that I would always give them is, so say a bank wants to introduce a new ATM system. They don't have one, or they need to introduce a new one. And that's going to be the project. So the project manager, me, will go and make that happen. So that might mean that I'm going to start working literally from scratch to work out what the problem is. As you said before, develop the business case. Then we might need to go and find an off-site venue. I had to do that for a large bank that I did a project for many years ago, where we couldn't fit the people into the bank building. We went and had something that was located elsewhere. So then it's all those resources. So simply put, when I say to my family, I don't tell them all that stuff. I just tell them, so a bank wants a new banking system. So I've got to work out as project manager how to get them from A to B. Now it sounds really simple, but as we've been talking, it's actually very hard. There's a lot in project management. So the day in the life of a project manager is very varied, and I'm not sure that it's something that you can get bored from. When we
That's
talk
right,
about it.
because every day is different.
Yeah,
You're working with people,
yeah,
you're, negotiating with other business units, vendors, sponsors, and and things come up. So every day is different, because if the issue is that there's a resource has resigned, well, then you're actually then having to go back to recruiting
yeah,
and, ensuring that there is a smooth transition between
yeah.
when that person leaves and when the new hire is
When the new one,
onboarded.
yeah. So if you had a plan for that day, it's now changed. And we
That's
talk
right.
primarily about information technology projects because that's our background. But I've also done some construction ones. So, as a project manager, you actually go out on site with your hard hat on. And make sure that the concrete's been poured properly. Yes, I can tick that off. Are the walls going up? Has the architect been? what's happening with procurement. So we talk often, you and I, Margaret, about the basic and the fundamentals of project management, which pretty much apply, I think, in all areas of industry if you're doing a project. I can't think of anything that would be different in terms of applying project knowledge and technique. But the day in the life is often different. You might be outside, you might be working on a building site, you might be in knee deep in mud, you might be a veterinarian or something, or I've worked for the government in biosecurity and biodiversity. So those projects are different. They're not just about information technology, they're about building legislation. So as a project manager, your day is not just about technology. It's about dealing with policy advisors, ministers, legal people. So it's
That's
very
right.
diverse, very, very diverse,
Very.
but the same principles apply. And that's all your project management tools and techniques that we've talked about lots of times. And just a reminder for people, if you're having a great time listening to this, please subscribe down below because we love bringing you these in-depth conversations about project management. So we've been going for about 40 minutes now, Margaret. So I think if we can wrap up with the last couple of things in summary, and we talked a little bit about the day in the life can change from the phase that you're in, from the type of project, if it's a program, what it is, the type of industry that you're in. And then we talked a little bit about the attributes, I guess, of a project manager that they're using every day. So is there something that you can sum up to, Margaret, from this conversation that demonstrates the day in the life of a project manager?
I have to say that a project manager is an expert in communicating, integrating all the different types of people,
Yeah,
ensuring that everyone is on the same page. So, I mean, they're the main skill sets that the project manager has to have. They're very good with people,
yeah.
communication, and integrating. And I mean, they're the top
They're the top
skills.
ones. And we also talked about coaching, negotiating,
Yeah,
brokering, and you
that's
do
right.
tend to do a fair bit of that as well. But look, we've had another fantastic discussion. Thanks so much, Margaret, for joining me today. I hope everybody has loved this conversation about the day in the life of a project manager. It can be very varied and it's exciting. So we're passionate about project management. Again, subscribe down below, come back next time. And in the meantime, have a great project day. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.